Hi, I'm Elizabeth Semmelhack, Senior Curator of the Bata Shoe Museum, and you're looking at the newest exhibition, Fashion Victims, The Pleasures and Perils of Dress in the 19th Century. I was lucky enough to work with Professor Alison Matthews-David on this project, and you are lucky enough to have her take you through the exhibition.
I'm Dr. Alison Matthews-David. I'm an Associate Professor in the School of Fashion here at Ryerson, and I want to show you one of my favorite cases in the exhibit. This case is actually loaded with arsenic. Arsenic was used, it was a very common, cheap thing in the 19th century. It was used to poison rats, but it was also used as a green pigment. We wanted to test if our objects at the Bata, if any of them had arsenic in them. And so we took them to Ryerson's Chair of Physics, Anna Milovich-Pesich, and she allowed us to test them in her state-of-the-art lab with Eric De Silva, who's a PhD candidate in physics. And so physics and fashion collaborated, and they were able to test samples of the dress and other shoes and boots and find the presence of arsenic in them. So it was really interesting to have this sort of, nobody had really tested textiles like this before. So we were able to say definitively that these textiles had a toxin. When we hear the words fashion victims, we think about female consumers who spend too much on their clothing. But in the 19th century, and perhaps today, there were male fashion victims as well. And if you were a 19th century man, you needed a couple of things to make you fashionable. One, you needed very shiny boots that had to be polished to a perfect sheen, which wasn't very easy in the muddy streets full of lots of nasty things in the 19th century. So you had a bunch of shoe shine boys who were essentially these poor homeless boys who would polish your boots to this beautiful sheen. And another accessory that you wore was also pretty toxic. It was the fur felt top hat. We have one here as well that the physics lab looked into. And hats for about 200 years contained mercury. So again, it didn't affect the wearer because your nice top hat was lined with a silk lining to protect you, but the hatters who made these hats suffered from trembling and shyness and irritability and for over 200 years. And basically, that's where the expression from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, our famous friend, the Mad Hatter, comes from this. So we may think that the Victorians, we may think they're crazy for cramming themselves into corsets and wearing heels and binding their feet, but of course we still wear Spanx, we skinny jeans and high heels, and I think many people are still willing to suffer for the sake of beauty. So I think the Victorians are actually more familiar than we might think. But just one parallel, for example, you think that it's all in the past, you know that people put lead in their makeup to make their face whiter. Well, most of our lipsticks today still contain lead. Some people might perceive fashion as frivolous and unimportant, but in fact it's a huge economic force and a huge social force. We want to conform and we want to look good, and so we are willing to follow the dictates of fashion, whether or not it affects our health, I think.